Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thanks for being here. This Go Show, this one is a teaching Go Show. This is I would venture to say, it's a treatise. So whether you're in your initial stages of Buddhist practice or whether you've been practicing a long time, there's going to be a lot of comparative scholarship here, a lot of information, both for our own practice, and you'll know when I read the title of this Go Show, sounds like a tease, but you'll know when I read this that it's also full of Bodhisattva teaching aids. In other words, tools to help explain why the Lotus Sutra, why Nichiren scholarship, why all these whys that come up for people who are curious about Buddhism, maybe not even practicing yet. But I would venture to say there's when you read Nichiren, it's dripping with scholarship. So unless you're talking to somebody who's done some study, has some exposure to sutras and the way Buddhism dissects things and the politics of Buddhism, quite frankly, Nichiren may just confuse. So I would venture to say that this is a great teaching tool for the Sangha, for somebody who's maybe in their first year of practice, where some of these questions, quite frankly, come after. A lot of people will start to practice Lotus Sutra Buddhism without having a grasp of any of it. They'll just start, you may have just started because of a desire to belong, to make friendships, so on and so forth. This is also the double-edged sword of groups and sects and so forth that take advantage of that very desire, and it comes with a lot of trouble. So to you, the individual who's starting your path, starting to recognize the power of your control and your development of your mental perception, so that you can become the driver of your life rather than constantly running after it. Nichiren is a great teacher, and Buddhism in general is all about it. So this Go Show is called How Those Initially Aspiring to the Way Can Attain Buddhahood Through the Lotus Sutra. Long title. And it starts out, and you can always tell this is going to be a letter or a treatise of Nichiren's, because it starts out with the question and answer format. So there's no thank you for the coins or a personal. Although this was probably written to, I'm going to venture, a nudo, a monk amongst the people, a lay monk. Let's see. I'm curious to know. I should have checked this before I started recording, but I was so eager. This letter was generally thought to have been written in the third year of Kenji in 1277, so we know he was retired to Minobu at the time, which is a great place to be pondering scholarship and writing treatises, right? Some even in late 1280 are estimates, so they don't know exactly when. Its recipient was a woman called the lay nun Myoho, who lived in Okamiya in Suruga province. Little is known about her other than she was widowed in 1278 and also lost an elder brother. She appears to have maintained steadfast resolve throughout her life. She is the same lay nun who received the one essential phrase from Nichiren in 1278. So certainly looks later than 1277 that he wrote this. But interesting. So she's a longtime follower of Nichiren's scholarship, long-time resolute practitioner of the Lotus Sutra. And so he is writing this to her in support of propagation. So you know, that's an interesting note too, is that he wrote this to a layperson. This is a very high-level scholarship, and he wrote it to a layperson who's propagating Lotus Sutra Buddhism. And you would expect in a normal authoritarian hierarchical group or sect or whatever, school, that this kind of thing would be reserved for those inner circle teachers, those disciples who are to take on the mantle of Nichiren's doctrine. But no, in fact, he treats not only a layperson, but a female layperson. And I know that may sound weird now, but think of samurai Japan, 13th century. That says a lot about not only Nichiren, but Buddhism, and certainly Nichiren's understanding of Buddhism, that we are all capable of Buddhahood and Bodhisattva practice. All of us, no matter what sex, no matter what caste or level of society, or import, non-import, we're all the same. So I think that's really something glaring for someone like Nichiren in the 13th century, deeply authoritarian samurai shogunate government. Really shows the power of Buddhism and the revolutionary attitude toward other human beings. So what did we read about recently? Forbearance. Kind of ties into that, right? All right. So without any more blah, 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 let's just dive into it. Nichiren begins this letter with a question. And he says, question, of the 8 schools, the 9 schools, or the 10 schools, which is the true school founded by Shakyamuni Buddha? Now, this is a primary question that I come up against often in reading, especially the Gosho, but in other commentaries and so forth. When other schools of Buddhism rise up and become popular, they tend to usurp the idea of Buddhism from some other magical source, either some previously imagined teaching tool Buddha that was created for teaching purposes by Shakyamuni, which is really ridiculous when you think about it, or from some other source, some imbued source that uses Buddhism, but we got our own thing, you know, like Bodhidharma and Zen Buddhism and so forth. There may have been really great intentions at first, but the politicization and the popularity and the trying to gain power through numbers by this manipulation of the teachings of Buddhism, that just happen over and over again throughout every country, every culture, right? Used as a tool of manipulation of the people rather than a tool to help each and every one, as Nichiren is doing with this letter, to realize their own Bodhisattva way and Buddha way. Bodhisattva way, I say, as a human being, this is what we practice, Bodhisattva way. The Buddha way is when you attain your enlightenment, which you do every time you chant a Gohan. Let's talk about that for a moment. There's this tendency to think of enlightenment as a one-time deal that we all achieve, and then, oh, we're in with the birds or the stars or whatever your visualization. The truth of the matter is, Buddhism is a science of the mind, and it's a science of the mind in order to live life to its fullest, your fullest potential, not mine, not hers, right? In doing so, we have a tool in Buddhism that the more we study, the more we gain confidence in, but the more we chant Myoho Renge Kyo, see, the more you study, the more the depth of Myoho Renge Kyo grows in your earthly mind, to train those monkeys to quiet down, not go away, but to quiet down and to respond to, and that's the key, your invocation of your clear Buddha mind. Every time you chant to Mandala Gohanzon, you do that. And it's a accumulation of daimoku and realizing, invoking your Buddha nature that allows and makes for that Buddha nature to become more and more a part of your daily mind, moment to moment. And so when we chant and we practice and we study, we don't hope for the day that once we achieve that final wonderful threshold, we'll hear the choir sing and we'll all be completely enlightened. Now, make no mistake, that day may in fact come, but it doesn't come in an earthquake all at once. It comes in little pieces, and those little pieces are your Buddha mind, your Buddha-ness. It just doesn't overtake all of the monkeys yet. Sometimes it will. Sometimes you'll be in a point of crisis. It usually happens then. Or you'll just be especially focused. And you'll be chanting and you'll forget the time. You know, have I chanted 5 minutes? Have I chanted 5.5 minutes? Have I chanted another 30 seconds or another half hour? When you're so focused on the mandala and your gohanzon, your enlightened nature that you're invoking, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, and that focus overtakes the monkey mind, time ceases to be in your head. It goes away. You're no longer concerned about it. Now you know you're fully in your Buddha mind. And hang out there for a while. You are enlightened. It is happening. Do you understand? It is happening right then. And if you stop, when it comes back to you, how long have I been here? You're already slipping out. So if you run out of breath, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, and you're in it, and you suddenly look around, everything's going to look very different to you. You'll slowly, you can almost hear it like a movie soundtrack. You start slipping back into samsara. But before you fully land there, because your mind's going to be, your monkey's going to be, remember me, you were thinking about this, you were thinking about that, right? That's samsara coming back. And you start to slip into this human life again, albeit with some resolve. Some of the things you started chanting with that were in your monkey's minds is no longer there, or resolved or altered in some way. That was a result of your awakening your Buddha mind. And as you do this more and more, you'll rely on it more and more. You'll have greater confidence in it more and more. You'll use it more and more, and it will start to control your life. In other words, your Buddha mind will start to overtake your monkey mind, and you will start to live a more fulfilled life. Your conditions will change. The people around you will change. The environment will change. What is actually changing, though, is your perceptive mind. All of those things are doing what they do. You don't control them. You control your perception of them. And therefore, because they are your environs, they are affected by your perception of them. And so that may push them away, and you no longer deal with that sort of thing, not that person specifically or that thing specifically, but that sort of influence disappears, and new positive nurturing influences start to take the place of those, and you're in your bodhisattva way. But when you're chanting, you're in your Buddha way. That's where the Buddha way is. It's in your enlightened mind. So keep that in mind. Words tricky. Okay, so as you know, in Japan at the time, there were competing schools. There were 8 major schools, different colorations of tradition and inculcated cultural systems of control that pointed to Nembutsu and True Word, Zen, and others. Those are the Pure Land. Those are the big 4 outside of Lotus Sutra, which had now been relegated to some, what was it, childish theory? Incredible. Anyway, so Nichiren was bucking that trend, obviously, and there were other less notable schools that were still quite popular. I often ask myself, how could there be such anger and hatred directed to Nichiren doctrine and his followers when there were so many other schools? It wasn't like there was Catholicism and Buddhism, or True Word, Tendai by another name, same thing, Nembutsu practice, and Nichiren. There were several schools. So how is it that Nichiren got such attention lavished on him negatively, while these other schools seem to all coexist? And the answer is in Nichiren's own analysis, as that they all share in some kind of little power struggle of political favor, while he, Nichiren, was resurrecting in a way the Lotus Sutra and pounding nails into all of these others. That's why he was raising such hatred, such anger toward him, because he was proving them to be erroneous baloney, and nobody likes to be told that they're, basically stupid, that they don't get it. You just aren't doing it right. Nobody likes to hear that, right? So, shakabuku, if you will. So Nichiren took that on as a very much needed pill to swallow. And a lot of people didn't want to swallow it. So he starts right off in those who are initially aspiring the way. What can you do to attain your Buddhahood? Well, let's talk about the 8 schools and the 9 schools, or the 10 schools, whichever ones you want to recognize, and which one of them are talking about, or school founded by Shakyamuni Buddha, right? Because they all pretend to be superseding him in some way. So let's get to the root of the matter. Answer: the Lotus School is the school founded by Shakyamuni, period. We know this because of the statement that of all the sutras, quote, I, Shakyamuni, have preached, now preach, and will preach, end quote, the Lotus Sutra is foremost, right? He says it in the Immeasurable Means chapter quite clearly. And this is the founder, Shakyamuni Buddha. So why would you deviate? These words were spoken by Shakyamuni Buddha himself. Therefore, the school based on the Lotus Sutra is known as the Buddha-founded school, and is also called the Lotus School. It is also known as the Tendai School, as originally set up by Tendai in China, some 600-700 years earlier, and certainly in Japan by Dengyo. For this reason, the great teacher Dengyo states in his commentary, quote, the Lotus School, which Tendai elucidated, represents the school founded by Shakyamuni, the world-honored one, end quote. In none of the sutras other than the Lotus does one find a passage concerning the relative superiority of all the sutras that, quote, I have preached, now preach, and will preach, end quote. Here, the sutras that the Buddha has preached refer to the various sutras expounded by the Buddha in the more than 40 years before he preached the Lotus Sutra. Those he now preaches refer to the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra. Those he will preach refer to the Nirvana Sutra. The Buddha thus firmly decreed that, transcending these three categories of sutras, the Lotus Sutra alone constitute the school that assures the attainment of Buddhahood in this samsaric form. Right? Basically summed up what I was just explaining. The various other schools were founded by bodhisattvas or teachers in the period after the Buddha had entered nirvana. Should we now turn our backs upon the Buddha's decree and follow the schools established by bodhisattvas and teachers? Or should we ignore the words of the bodhisattvas and teachers and follow the school established by the Buddha? Or should we entrust ourselves to either course as the feeling strikes us, and uphold whatever sutra or doctrine suits our inclination? Good question. The Buddha knew long ago that we would have doubts of this kind, and therefore he clearly designated the sutra to be embraced by those who are truly aspiring to the way in this defiled and evil, consumed with avarice, anger, and stupidity, age of the latter day of the law. A sutra says, quote, rely on the law and not upon the persons. Rely on the meaning of the teaching and not on the words. Rely on wisdom and not discriminating thinking. Rely on sutras that are complete and final and not on those that are not complete and final. End quote. The meaning of this passage is that one should not rely upon the words of the bodhisattvas and the teachers, but one should heed what was established by the Buddha. It further means that one should not rely upon the teachings of the true word Zen and Nembutsu schools, which are based upon the sutras of the flower garland, agama, correct and equal, and wisdom periods, but should uphold the sutras that are complete and final. And by relying upon, quote, sutras that are complete and final, end quote, it means upholding the Lotus Sutra. Question. Observing Japan at the present time, we see that the obstacles presented by the 5 impurities are very grave, that quarrels and disputes occur incessantly, and that people's minds are consumed with anger and their thoughts filled with jealousy. In such a country, and at such a time as this, what sutra ought to be propagated? Thought he just answered that, but here's a question from a different point of view. Again, what he talked about as discriminating thinking, right? This is a question made of discriminating thinking. Answer. This is a country in which the Lotus Sutra should be propagated. Period. End of it. That is applicable to all of us in this latter day of the law. But it looks like Nichiren is going to point this out from different perspectives over and over again. Therefore, the Lotus Sutra itself says, quote, I will cause it to be widely propagated throughout Jambudvipa and will see that it never comes to an end, end quote. Now, you know Jambudvipa is the planet Earth, so throughout the world. The treatise on the stages of yoga practice states that there is a small country situated to the northeast where the Mahayana teachings of the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law should be spread. And the Reverend Anen states, quote, this refers to our country of Japan, end quote. From the point of view of India, Japan is indeed situated to the northeast. Moreover, the supervisor of priests, Eshin, or of monks, Eshin, states in his Essentials of the One Vehicle teaching, throughout Japan, quote, all people share the same capacity to attain Buddhahood through the perfect teaching. Whether at court or in the countryside, whether far or near, all alike turn to the single vehicle, and whether monks or lay believers, whether eminent or humble, all can hope to attain Buddhahood. So you would think that, this is not just Nichiren saying this. This is Shakyamuni said this to begin with, and here are these teachers, even in Japan at the time, who are saying, this is the one vehicle. This was what will bring anyone to their Buddha nature, right? The meaning of this passage is that the people of Japan, whether they live in Kyoto, Kamakura, Tsukushi, Shinzai, or Michinoku, whether they live nearby or far away, are endowed with the capacity to attain Buddhahood solely through the one vehicle teaching of the Lotus Sutra. Now that applies to all of us. Doesn't matter what our status is, whether we live in a big city or out in the country or in the boonies, whatever. It doesn't matter what your current life state is. The state of Buddhahood is part and parcel of the life process. So it's innate, it's within you. And that Japan is therefore a country where high and low, eminent and humble, those who observe the precepts and those who break them, men and women alike, can all attain Buddhahood through the Lotus Sutra, just as there is no ordinary stone in the Kunlun Mountains and no poisons on the mountain island of Penglai. So Japan is purely and wholly a country of the Lotus Sutra. And yet we find people, while declaring with their mouths that the lotus is inherently a wonderful sutra, and that no one could therefore refuse to take resolute mind and conviction in it, nevertheless spend night and day, morning and evening, reciting the name of Amida Buddha. They are like people who sing the praises of a particular medicine, and yet morning and evening dose themselves on poison. Or they are those who declare that the Nembutsu and the Lotus Sutra are essentially one. They are like persons who claim... Now, the only people who could claim that are people who either are completely ignorant or willfully spreading ignorance. And, as I've said before, that's an easy thing to do in times when people are illiterate. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be literate to attain Buddhahood. What it means is that people can take advantage of you if you don't study for yourself. If all you are is a follower, there's very little that can be done to increase your conviction unless you just happen to stumble into it. But even you, if you chant Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, will alight your Buddha mind. What the point I'm making and what Nichiren is making here is that if somebody comes along who's charismatic and says, no, that Namo Myoho Renge Kyo stuff isn't it, just chant Amida Buddha, it's much easier and you'll reach the promised land much more easily. They might sway you because you wouldn't know any different. So this is the importance of a Sangha in this case, of good friends, people who help you gain your confidence and your steadfast practice in Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. And certainly the more you practice Myoho Renge Kyo and enlighten yourself, these influencers of wrong paths will cease to affect you and you won't listen to them. So that dynamic is certainly alive and well in an age of the samurai where language literacy, that kind of thing, was reserved for the elite classes. So this Nichiren too is facing this overwhelming obstacle. This is why he addresses all of his remonstrations to the ruling class, because he knows as their understanding goes, so oftentimes do the populace, because they're just doing what they're told, right? Authoritarianship. All right. They are like persons who claim that ordinary stones are the same as gems, senior monks identical to junior monks, and poison equivalent to medicine. So he's making the point over and over again. In addition, there are many who hate, envy, resent, slander, despise, and look down on the Lotus Sutra. And obviously they're doing so out of very poor understanding, because if they were studying like you and I, they would know better. But they're just taking on the demonization that they're being told to take on by teachers who would want them to follow those teachers instead of the right teachings, right? It's the same old story. No, don't listen to what they're saying. I know best for you. I'm the one who loves you. I'm the one who cares for you. Do what I say. And those people are bad, bad, bad people, bad. Right? Demonize them, make them bad. And then the people who follow you will go, yeah, you're right. Right? But we, today, in the latter day, we all can study. We all can see for ourselves. So it's important that we help one another through times of doubt, because we know better. We're capable of knowing better. So we don't have to fall into these ego traps, basically. The sutra says, quote, "It will face much hostility in the world and be difficult to gain confidence in." It also says, "Since hatred and jealousy toward this sutra abound even when the thus come one is in the world, how much more will this be so after his passing?" Because when Shakyamuni was around teaching this stuff, he was going against the grain quite demonstrably through his writings and through the attacks on his life, right? These predictions of the sutra have come about without the slightest deviation. In other words, it's happening now, right? Therefore, the great teacher Dengyo writes in his commentary, speaking of the age, the propagation of the true teaching will begin, in the age when the middle day of the law ends and the latter day opens. Regarding the land, it will begin in a land to the east of Tang and to the west of Katsu. As for the people, it will spread amongst people stained by the 5 impurities, who live in a time of conflict, shogunate, Japan. The sutra says, "Since hatred and jealousy toward this sutra abound, even when the thus come one is in the world, how much more will it be so after his passing? There is good reason for this statement," end quote. Where are we time-wise? From these passages of the sutra and commentaries, one should know the following. In Japan, in one mountain monastery after another, in temple after temple, at court and in the countryside, in both near and distant regions, through scriptural teachings other than the Lotus Sutra, such as those of the True Word, Zen, precepts, and Nembutsu schools, are being propagated. These are not teachings that suit the country, or that conform to the Buddha's true intention, nor can they free us from the sufferings of birth and death. That's a very important resolve to that question. And I want to talk about it for a moment, because there would be a tendency amongst us to say, well, he's saying that of Japan. Japan is where this is true. What about here, wherever you are? So I think I want to be careful what I say here, because you could easily just say, well, that's your opinion, Sifu. You know, that's just you talking out of turn. But I want to point to one critical aspect of what Nichiren is saying here. Now, of course, Nichiren is addressing his country and his fellow countrymen, because those are his audience on the island of Japan. But he's traveled to China, he's traveled to Korea, he's traveled all over. This scholarship is not unique to Japan, but suffice it to say, he's talking to his Japanese brethren. He's challenging the obfuscating forces of these other schools, trying to deter his fellow man from practicing correctly. But he does throw in something in this sentence that's quite universal. And as you know by now, Nichiren's constantly not only referring to his own brethren, but constantly referring to Jampudvipa. reminding that the Japanese are part of a much larger world of beings, and that the teachings apply to that entire world. But be that as it may, in this one sentence, as we are fond of narrow attention spans, we might say, well, you see, he's saying it there himself, that it's just for the country of Japan. He's saying it's for the country of Japan in the bigger picture, as the leaders of the latter day of the law will be responsible for initiating the propagation throughout Jambudvipa. Okay, you could also say that's my interpretation. I think if you do your own investigation, you'll see that I'm just parroting the words of Nichiren. It's not my idea. But that part of this sentence that says, these are not the teachings that suit the country, and I would argue that that country is Jambudvipa, but he's speaking directly to the Japanese, so okay. Or that conform to the Buddha's true intention. What is the Buddha's true intention? Didn't he state that clearly when he started? Before he attained enlightenment as Siddhartha Gautama, his intention was clear: to find a universal answer for all sentient and insentient beings, regardless. And this was in India, not Japan. His intention was that any being could easily attain enlightenment, no matter their status in life. Oh, does this sound repetitive? No matter their caste. In India, still today, very divided in a caste system. That no matter, and that's important to remember, the caste system isn't like class struggle in the United States or Britain or anywhere else, where there's an elite financial class and then there's an economic middle, and so to speak. I know it's more, but that's my point. When they talk about a 1% and 99%, or middle class, low middle class, high middle class, there's all these gray areas, right? Because you can travel through those economic realities. You're not pigeonholed in one place, although some would argue oppression keeps people in a poverty class. But those are all economical arguments. In India, a caste, C-A-S-T-E system, not class, caste, means that when you're born to a cobbler you will be. There will never be any other opportunity for you. Period. No matter how much you study, no matter how much wealth you gain, you will be limited because you are the cobbler class. You are the bicycling class. You are the merchant class. You are the professional physician class. You are the scholar class. You are, and you forever, and your children and your children's children will be that. Period. Those are hard ceilings. Those aren't gray. And this is the society that Shakyamuni makes his appearance in. And so the import of him saying that no matter what social caste you are, you can attain Buddhahood was an extremely disturbing statement to the powers that be in India in his day. So understand that you and I don't have that limitation. We have socioeconomic limitations, but those are fluid and they're not pretty, but they equally don't affect our ability to become or to awaken our Buddha nature, right? So when he says, nor can they free us from the sufferings of birth and death, he's talking about attaining Buddhahood, right? That's our freedom, our liberation from the attachment of this moment to moment arising and falling away and decay. That doesn't need to control our experience of life, the life process. So he's talking about these other schools that are extant in Japan, Zen, True Word, Precepts, so on and so forth. These are not the teachings that suit the country of Japan, arguably. That's what he's talking about. But he's talking to Japanese, so this is his frame of reference. But he always opens the conversation, I've said this before, of this being the proper teaching for all beings of Jampudvipa. He is immediately addressing his brethren in Japan. But that doesn't cut him off from everything he's ever said about this being about Jampudvipa. And Buddha's true intention, the Buddha never said people of Japan or this country to the west or the northeast, will be where the Buddhas instantiate. He never said that. So that's a very key statement. The Buddha's true intention was a universal enlightenment, right? So don't create your own obstacles by reading limitations into when you read these letters. You have to constantly understand, use your Buddha mind, that Nichiren is at once addressing people in his space, but also constantly throughout all of his teachings talking about the bigger picture of enlightenment and Jampudvipa, and actually taking responsibility as a votary of the Lotus Sutra to propagate this teaching widely throughout Jampudvipa. He's talking to the Japanese, but he's giving them a responsibility of being the stewards of pushing this out into the broader world. Okay? So, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Keep your practice strong. We'll have several parts to this Gosho because he gets into a lot here. But there's a lot of summation of Buddhism in this letter, but there is also a lot of specifics. Always something to gain from going through Nichiren's Gosho. And I don't know, I haven't said this in a long time, but if you're feeling a little uneasy or a lot of doubts creeping in, I know for my practice it was essential that every now and again I just pick up a Gosho, wherever it was, didn't even care, or look for a key word that for some reason was bouncing around in my head, and find Goshos that had that word in it and just start reading. Doesn't have to be a specific order, right? But invariably, in every letter Nichiren writes, there's some morsel of insight that will make you think, and then go and spend some time in front of your mandala and chant. Just chant. Doesn't have to be about that Gosho, because it's already in your head. You just need to chant to hear, to experience whatever it is that you're confused or having doubts about, and then just lose yourself in mandala. Lose yourself in your Buddhahood. Don't adhere to those problems that you walk to the Gohonzon with. Don't instantiate them over and over and over again in front of this mandala. You're stuck. Take that will of and strong desire to work this out, to get unconfused, to get undoubtful. Take that as your main focus when you go to this mandala and chant. My car's not running, my car's not running, my car's not running. Well, of course, your car's not running. So take that frustration about the car not running, go to Gohonzon and go, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. I don't want this running my life. I want my Buddha mind to take over, to run my mind with clarity. I have confidence that I can do this. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. And with that Ichinen, you will experience your Buddha mind, and you will walk away with resolve and resolution. You try it, you'll see. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate you guys so much. And I'm deeply proud of you guys, because as we all know, this practice does take some courage, some effort. You have to really work at it. Sometimes it's as easy as pie, but it's those moments of crisis, doubt, trauma, those moments, even though they challenge us most, they can be huge springboards in our realization of our Buddha nature. So I encourage you to Keep it up. You're doing great. And I'm amazed by you. So let's keep going, all right? And don't forget to download these things as podcasts. The Buddhahood podcast, right? See you soon. We'll see you in the next one. Part 2 is coming up. Bye now.